From the studios of KPFK Pacifica Radio in Los Angeles, this is Uprising, and I'm Sonali. It's Wednesday, January 14th, 2015. We'll go live to Albuquerque, New Mexico today to speak with local activist Adriann Barboa on the murder charges against two officers in the shooting death of a homeless man named James Boyd. And we'll turn to Truth Out's Dahr Jamail on the role of methane in catastrophic climate change and how it could spark a runaway feedback loop. Plus, Bechir Blagui, founder of FreeTunisia.org, joins us live in studio on the 4th anniversary of the Tunisian Revolution and the fall of President Ben Ali. That's coming up after the news. Joining us now to analyze today's headlines is Courtney Morris. She's an assistant professor of African American and Women's Studies at Penn State University. Hi, Courtney. 54 people have been arrested in and around France in the days following the Charlie Hebdo attacks. Even though none of them have had any connection to the attacks, 4 of them are minors. President François Hollande has ordered the arrests of those who have publicly defended the attacks or engaged in anti-Semitic hate speech. Even Associated Press saw the irony, pointing out, quote, questions about whether President François Hollande's socialist government is impinging on the very freedom of speech that it so vigorously defends when it comes to Charlie Hebdo. Among those arrested was a prominent black comedian named Dieudonné, who has often made light of the Holocaust. Meanwhile, a senior leader of the group Al-Qaeda in Yemen has formally taken credit for ordering the January 8th attack. So, Courtney, apparently there are some people that it's okay to insult them based on their religious beliefs and others that are not. Are you shocked by the hypocrisy that keeps emerging from these attacks in France? Courtney, we're going to actually have to call you back because it looks like we can't hear you, and we'll get you back on our Skype connection. Again, the story that we are talking about this today is the fact that France has arrested 54 people in connection with insulting or hate speech, rather, and anti-Semitism, as well as publicly defending the attacks by armed men in Paris that took place just about a week ago at the offices of the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo. None of them, as I mentioned, have had any connection to the attacks themselves. Some of them are minors. There is also a black French comedian who has been arrested, and he has come under controversy in the past for making fun of the Holocaust and engaging in other speech that is considered anti-Semitism. Courtney, are you back with us?
I think so.
Yes, so this hypocrisy that we see emerging from the attacks in France, your thoughts on that?
Well, I guess we've had about a week now to get used to this and see how this is all going to play out. And I think that this was something that many of us were concerned about from the beginning, that this would become another way to justify Islamophobia, the growing Islamophobia that we've seen developing in Europe over the last decade or so. And it's really distressing. I mean, it definitely seems that the laws around that police hate speech are really less about protecting the rights of all people and are really about policing what can and cannot be said about representations of Islam in the West. And so it really seems that it's a way of going after Muslims and also those who criticize Islamophobia in the media and using the banner of terrorism or the defense of terrorism to police that speech. And that is, it's deeply hypocritical and, more importantly, it deeply harms whatever liberal notions we have about free speech in the West.
And then here in the United States, the Billings Police Department in Montana has just released dashcam video of a white officer, Grant Morrison, minutes after he fatally shot an unarmed Latino man high on methamphetamine. The officer was doubled over and sobbing. Morrison is heard saying, quote, "I thought he was going to pull a gun on me." A jury at a coroner's inquest last week decided in under an hour that the shooting of Richard Ramirez was justified, prompting the county attorney to decide not to file any charges. Ramirez's surviving family says he was the victim of racial profiling. It was the second time that Morrison had killed somebody while on duty. In a 2013 case, he was also cleared of all wrongdoing. So, Courtney, I don't know about you, but I found the video to be highly disingenuous. I mean, Officer Morrison's breakdown very conveniently taking place right in front of the police car's dash cam. He's alive, of course, and absolved of all wrongdoing, but someone else is dead for no good reason.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, of course, this is a very complicated situation, and, taking a human life is a serious thing. And there were similar reports of police officers breaking down, for example, at the shooting of Amadou Diallo in 1999. So these things happen. But ultimately, Officer Morrison made a judgment call, and he misjudged. He made a mistake. And it isn't surprising that the media is much kinder to police officers when they take the lives of unarmed civilians than they are to the civilians that they kill, who get raked over the coals. And it's really shameful. The dead can't speak for themselves. And it makes me think about the shootings last month in Brooklyn, where protesters with the Black Lives Matter movement, their response to the police killings is, yes, we know exactly how you feel because we have lost loved ones many, many times. And instead of that being used as a way of bridging the divide between the police and the communities that they are meant to serve, that was largely ignored by the mainstream media.
And finally, in another story of violence in our justice system, a new report has found a pattern of shocking abuse by New York City jail guards. The Associated Press found through a public records request that corrections officers in the state used force more than 4,000 times last year alone. These included punching and pepper spraying. Given that these were the incidents that were actually reported, the real number might, of course, be much higher. The data was released on the same day that federal prosecutors met with New York City officials over the use of force on Rikers Island against its youngest inmates. Rikers is the U.S.'s second largest jail system. The negotiations stem from a scathing report by federal investigators last August that found a, quote, deep-seated culture of violence. New York Mayor Bill de Blasio yesterday announced a ban on the use of solitary confinement for all inmates aged 21 and younger at Rikers. Courtney, there's violence from our armed police on our streets, and then when people are jailed, there's more violence. Is there a sickness in American society?
Well, absolutely. I mean, we live in a culture that's not well, and the culture of violence that characterizes policing institutions in this country is it's violent. I mean, it's a deeply violent place, and so I think that these reforms are an important step in the right direction in terms of really making interventions at the top. That the only way that we're going to be able to transform this thing is by really transforming these institutions from the inside out. And solitary confinement is deeply harmful to young people. We know that it has seriously harmful effects for them in terms of mental wellness. And so it's encouraging to see the de Blasio administration really taking a stand on this. And hopefully we'll continue to see more of the same from this, despite the pushback from the police unions and the prison guards unions.
Thank you so much, Courtney, as always. Courtney Morris is our daily Newsflash guest expert and an assistant professor of African American and Women's Studies at Penn State University. We'll be right back. This is Uprising. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar. You can now watch Uprising on Free Speech TV, which airs on Dish Network, Channel 9415, Direct TV Channel 348, and hundreds of part-time cable affiliates, as well as on Roku. 2 officers have been charged with murder in the fatal shooting of a homeless man in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in an event that took place last year. A 38-year-old white man named James Boyd was killed after a 4-hour standoff in the foothills of the Sandia Mountains when police threw a stun grenade at him and then shot him several times. Mr. Boyd reportedly had a history of mental illness. A video of the shooting from a camera of one of the officers shows Boyd was dozens of yards away from police and attempting to leave peacefully when the grenade was first launched at him. Within seconds, officers began firing at the man, who died shortly after. After many months of public outrage and protests, District Attorney Carrie Brandenburg decided simply to bring charges against Detective Keith Sandy and Officer Dominique Perez, rather than convene a secret grand jury, as was done in Ferguson and New York. Communities in Albuquerque have been agitating for years against police brutality. More than 24 people were killed in officer-involved shootings between 2010 and 2014. The U.S. Department of Justice has ordered Albuquerque Police Department to hold police officers accountable And to talk about that now is my guest, Adriann Barboa. She is the Field Director of Strong Families, New Mexico. Welcome, Adriann.
Hi, thank you for having me this morning.
How important are these charges? Are they a long time coming? And do you think that they are directly the result of political activism by people in the community?
Yes, to all of that. You know, the this plague that is upon our city and has been going on for decades, but definitely notably since 2010. You know, the numbers of shootings, the number of murders committed by police officers in our city has been unaddressed. And Carrie Brandenburg has not. This is the first time that there's actually charges being placed against officers, which is definitely a long time coming. We've been working with the families, Strong Families New Mexico, and APD Ford has been working with the families, and we recently ran a petition to ask for indictments from the Department of Justice and from the district attorney, because the families have not seen justice. While we are excited about the reform that's moving forward in Albuquerque, we have not seen any of these officers be put to charges. And that's really what families want. They just want to see the day in court that these people that have unjustly killed their family and loved ones, that they have to see that their day in court, that no one is above the law. And
Right.
to answer your question about politically, yeah, I do think that politically motivated from all the different approaches that folks are taking, from taking to the streets to getting petition signatures, from lawyers putting pressure on. I think that it's finally hitting home, and James Boyd is the one place. Although it's been going on for decades here, James Boyd is the one place that we're finally getting to see some charges back.
Right. Now, the officers and their lawyers are quite confident that these two men are going to be acquitted. When I watched the video that was released from the helmet cam, and I'm sure you've watched it as well, and our audience can certainly find it on Google. It's been released by the Albuquerque Police Department after a lot of pressure. So in watching the video, it's pretty apparent that Mr. Boyd could in no way have harmed him. I mean, harmed the officers. That is, he was quite far away from them. He was armed with apparently just two knives that he pulled out after he was stunned with a grenade. You can't even see the knives in the video. They're so small. And the officers, of course, were armed with these enormous rifles. They were, many yards away. They had a dog with them. And he was literally, Mr. Boyd was putting on his backpack, started to pick up his water bottles, had turned around and was walking away when you hear the order from the officer whose helmet cam is on, do it. That's the order he gives. Do it. The stun grenade is thrown. He's stunned. And they just charge at him, shoot him, and kill him. Had they done nothing and let him leave, he probably wouldn't be dead.
Had they arrested him? I mean, there was numerous amounts of police at the site. He was a homeless man trying to find a place to sleep, and there was numerous police at this site. There's no way that he could have caused any harm to them. And he even explains to them that he is afraid for his life if he goes there. And so, and I don't know how much you've been able to follow the story, but there's also been audio tape of Officer Sandy saying that he's going to shoot him in the pecker.
Ugh.
There was just, and that was before even getting to the scene. Officer Sandy, there's audio tape of him saying that. This whole, but like I said, this is the first time that it was that people were able to see it so vividly, and that even though this has plagued our city for decades now, to be able to see it, to have the video, to have the evidence, I think folks were really hoping, and we are all really hoping, that this does get the kind of charges it deserves.
Right, and so that actually brings up this question of body-worn cameras, which has become a point of debate, but also been offered as a solution by authorities to say, well, police might be more likely to control themselves and not engage in violence if they're wearing these cameras, because they'll know they'll be more accountable. But of course, many police officers already have cameras. They have dash cameras on their cars. They have helmet cameras. Some of them are already wearing body cameras. Sometimes they don't turn them on. When they do turn them on, that doesn't necessarily seem to deter them. And when it is turned on, when we see the video, it doesn't necessarily mean that police are going to even get charged or convicted, because somehow it always ends up that police are justified in killing unarmed people, and it's just so rare to see convictions these days. It's rare to see charges as well, which is why this is news today that these police officers are even being charged. Can you put Boyd's killing into a broader context for our listeners who may not realize that Albuquerque is a center of police violence? We know New York and LA and now Ferguson, but Albuquerque?
Yeah, and I think that thank you for bringing that up. I think that one of the things is that we do need to work in solidarity. This is an obvious notion about what is going on across the country. When we, saw the, when we were able to see the choking of a man and how that turned out, and how this Boyd shooting, the DOJ has also said that they do not find sufficient evidence to press indictment charges at the federal level on the Boyd shooting, which was a huge disappointment again for this community. I think that we're seeing the pattern that even with sufficient evidence, I think for a long time people were fighting for lapel cameras because they believed that would bring us the kind of justice we need, the kind of evidence we need for people to be charged with and to reform police departments across the country. But we're seeing that isn't helping, right? And that actually we still have, like, APD Forward, part of the coalition of groups that are working on reform. Folks still want to see lapel cameras implemented, but we're now learning that's not going to get us as far as we need. We need a full movement to be aware and behind this.
And it seems as though the cameras are, at the very least, one of the things they can do is generate public outrage, even if that is not translating into justice in this justice system, as we saw with the video of Eric Garner, and as we might be seeing, certainly in Albuquerque, we're seeing it, and around the country, hopefully we'll see this, the public outrage, because once people see for themselves how police are behaving, it does change the conversation. So let's turn to, you've been mentioning APD Forward, APD, which is the Albuquerque Police Department. APD Forward is a coalition of community groups. Tell us what this organization has been doing, how it has been attempting to hold police accountable, and can it provide a model for the way in which people might be needing to hold their departments accountable all over the country?
Well, yes, and so I want to start with Strong Families is one of the core members of APD Forward, and we've set a coalition which has a broad range of representation from different groups and family members and individuals from across our city, but we have some very specific approaches that are very much our goals, and the benchmarks for our progress are really based around seeing that reform happens, seeing that we are following the consent decree, that we're seeing it through implementation, that we're making sure things like right now, for instance, that there's a federal monitor picked that actually meets the needs of our city. So those are the ways that APD Forward is specifically working. But I just have to say that across the city, there are folks taking different approaches, working on this issue from multiple angles. And I think that that's what every city needs is, there are people that are taking different approaches, that are calling out on the mayor, that are specifically calling out to fire the police chief. Every approach is needed because it keeps the conversation going, it keeps the public aware, and it keeps us moving forward.
So, Adriann, also in terms of the killings in general in Albuquerque, New Mexico, we've seen in other cities and in many parts of the country that it's Black and brown folks, and men in particular, that are disproportionately the targets of police violence. James Boyd was a homeless white man. Do you see disproportionate targeting of Black and brown men in Albuquerque as well?
Yeah, yes. So James Boyd is a white man. A couple of the other people, of the 27 people since 2010 who have been killed, and actually there was a police officer shooting last night. Wow. I meant to say that at the beginning of the call. Wow. So as our numbers keep to rise, which seems like on a weekly, monthly basis, there definitely is a disproportion. The one thing about New Mexico is that we are a majority state. So, the number of officers that are people of color, is probably is not in the same kind of disproportional rate as it is in other cities. Although we still do have a majority of white officers, even though we are a minority majority state. We do see that, and I myself, both personal reasons and as representing Strong Families, which works on multiple sectors, I myself have seen it with my own son. I have a 19-year-old son. He, since the age of 12, has been continuously harassed while standing at the bus stop,
Wow.
while walking down the street by police. And, you know, it went from him being this young brown man that was so charismatic and people loved him. And as soon as he reached puberty, you know, he was targeted by police just for walking down the street, just for sitting at the bus stop. So, you know, we know that racial profiling exists in Albuquerque. A lot of our stances haven't put out the race piece up front because I think James Boyd was the catalyst that got people very aware, although people have been working on this issue, like I said, for decades. But it's like you said, it's having the video was able to finally show people that this is a very clear that our officers are not acting with the best interest of the public.
Adriann, I want to thank you so much for joining us today, and best of luck to you.
I want to add one quick thing, if
Yes.
I can. Just that Strong Families New Mexico ran a petition in which we got over 45,000 signatures with Ken Ellis. Folks can still go to that Ken Ellis petition, No One is Above the Law. We presented that to the district attorney.
And Ken Ellis is?
Ken Ellis is is the father of one of the people. He was an Iraq war veteran that was shot and killed by police officers.
So this is a petition on another police shooting that you're collecting signatures for. Where is there a website you can give out?
Well, it's on the change.org, and it's No One is Above the Law, Ken Ellis. And the really important piece about this is that families, you know, this whole call is about the charges faced. There are 27 people killed. No one's been charged. There are families that have been promised to just be patient, just trust the political process, and it is not happening. They are not getting to see their day in court, and their cases date back way before James Boyd.
Right.
So we're glad that James Boyd officers are getting charged, but we really need to see justice for all these families.
And we'll post a link to the change.org petition on our website, uprisingwithsonali.com, later today, and our audience can check it there. Thank you so much again, Adriann.
Thank you.
Adriann Barboa is the field director of Strong Families New Mexico. This is Uprising. When we come back, we'll take a look at what's happening in the Arctic and Siberia with catastrophic climate change being driven by not carbon dioxide, but methane. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali Kohatkar. You can now watch the TV version of Uprising online on youtube.com/uprising with Sonali. That's our YouTube channel. Please subscribe. An enormous mysterious crater was discovered last summer in Siberia's Yamal Peninsula, making headlines all over the world. It was not the result of a missile explosion or a meteorite or even alien life, as some speculated. Scientists discovered unusually high concentrations of methane gas at the bottom of the crater. It is now known that permafrost containing large amounts of methane melted due to higher than average temperatures, causing the crater. We all know that carbon dioxide released by the burning of fossil fuels is warming the planet dangerously, but what many of us are not accounting for is that a warming planet is causing major formations of ice in places like the Arctic and Siberia to melt, which in turn is releasing huge pockets of trapped methane. Now, methane is a far more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, and the release of a large amount could spark a positive feedback loop, triggering catastrophic runaway global warming. My guest is Dahr Jamail. He's a staff reporter at Truthout. He's the author of the books The Will to Resist, Soldiers Who Refuse to Fight in Iraq and Afghanistan, and Beyond the Green Zone, Dispatches from an Unembedded Journalist in Occupied Iraq. He's also won the Martha Gellhorn Award for Investigative Journalism, among many other awards. And his latest piece in Truthout is called The Methane Monster Roars. Hi, Dahr.
Hi, Sonali. Good to be with you.
So each summer during the warmer months, as I understand it, and as you've written, Arctic sea ice retreats, it melts, and then it forms back over the winter. And during recent years, scientists have found that because of global warming, more and more is melting each summer, and that apparently in 2 summers, all of the Arctic ice will melt during summer of 2016. And so does that mean that all the methane trapped in it will be released by then?
Well, that's the general idea, but it's, we need to get a little bit more specific in that the retreating and the shrinking and the thinning of the Arctic sea ice has been happening since basically the 70s is when we started on a long, slow in human terms, fast in geologic terms, decline in the Arctic sea ice, both in thickness and in reach. And so we are setting records now every year as far as how much is left volume-wise. And what's happening is that's obviously then opening up a lot more of the Arctic Ocean so that solar radiation can reach down in, start warming the water faster, as well as reaching the permafrost in the shores and on the shallow continental shelves on the north coasts. And underneath those, in the permafrost and underneath the water in the shallows lie methane hydrates, which is basically methane gas, ancient methane gas, encased in ice, and that's melting and releasing the gas. Bubbles are coming up through the water. In the permafrost on land, it's going directly into the atmosphere, and that's the methane then that's kicking into the climate system, and it's speeding up warming, which then of course causes more of the ice to melt, which starts the whole thing over again, and that's what we call a positive feedback loop. And so a lot of the scientists I've been talking to, like Dr. Ira Leifer, like Natalia Shikova with the International Arctic Research Center out of University of Alaska Fairbanks. These are folks who've been studying it for years. Natalia herself for over a decade. And they're very worried that we've already started this positive feedback loop.
So the methane that is trapped in the ice as well as in permafrost on land, essentially this was trapped during a time when there were high concentrations of methane. I mean, this is, as you said, ancient methane. The audience might be curious as to how the methane got there in the first place.
It's methane that had been trapped there from the ancient geologic past. There have been other instances in the planet's history where we've had massive amounts of methane in the atmosphere. And what's particularly worrisome about what I discovered writing this article and some of the other reports I've written about this is that we're starting to see signs that we've possibly recreated sort of a human-caused version of the Permian mass extinction, which is also known as the Great Dying. It happened 250 million years ago, and it was a event where basically volcanic vents opened up across Siberia, injected enough CO2 into the atmosphere to raise the planetary temperature enough so that at that time frozen methane was also released, that then kicked the cycle into a higher gear and caused up to 95% of all life on Earth to go extinct. And so we could well, as some of the scientists I spoke with, we could well be setting ourselves up to have already started a cycle like that to happen again. And that's what's particularly worrisome about this and why so much attention is focused on the Arctic right now.
Right. You also write in your piece in Truthout about the eastern Siberian Arctic shelf. And then I mentioned the bizarre looking craters that were discovered last summer in one part of Siberia. These craters that were literally formed by permafrost melting and these giant holes that then it was determined had high concentrations of methane at the bottom of them. Do scientists, are they able to account for all the sources of methane that are being released? I mean, obviously the biggest fear of climate change is that we're not going to be able to account for or be able to predict all of the impacts as they're happening.
There's numerous sources. We've only been talking about the Arctic, but
Right.
if we talk about fracking, of course, which has exploded across North America and even other parts of the world at this point, there's huge amounts of methane being released from every single fracking operation, and there's hundreds of thousands at this point. And so that's a source. Industrial agriculture is another huge source. I mean, there's sources all over the planet. There was a situation just off the coast of Washington State, up nearby where I live, where it was discovered that subsea frozen hydrates are melting and already leaking up and bubbling up through the ocean there. Not too long ago, just a few months ago, hundreds of similar sources found off the east coast of the United States, off in the Atlantic. A lot of more sources of methane that hadn't been found before, also releasing up into the ocean, and then some of it getting up into the atmosphere. So there's all kinds of sources, but again, all of it adds up. All of it's going into the same atmosphere, and you know, you mentioned earlier that methane's so much more potent than CO2, and it's really not covered so much by the International Panel on Climate Change. Where they talk about in the reports, they are so focused on CO2, it gets a little bit of a mention. But the fact is, methane is 100 times more potent greenhouse gas than is CO2 in a short time scale, meaning around 20 years. And even over a 100-year time scale, it's still about 20 years as potent as CO2.
And I should just mention on Monday of this week, a new study that used a mountaintop sensor to measure air pollution in the Los Angeles basin found that methane emissions are up 61%. That's higher, 61% higher than government estimates. The LA Times reported this, saying, quote, the methane detected probably came from a variety of sources, including natural gas pipelines, vehicles, waste facilities, farms, and naturally occurring seeps like the La Brea tar pits. I mean, so we're not accounting for this. However, just yesterday, White House officials announced plans to impose new regulations on the oil and gas industry's emissions of methane. The Obama administration's goal is to cut methane emissions from oil and gas production by up to 45% by the year 2025 from the levels recorded in 2012. Obviously, even these timescales, 2025 seems like it's far too long a timescale for us to really curb this, and this is just focusing on the oil and gas industry. But is the acknowledgement a first good step?
Well, it is. I mean, this is a huge issue that absolutely needs a massive amount of attention and even more importantly, abrupt action on a global scale. And you know, but it's kind of a similar type of reaction as the Obama administration and so many other governments around the world have had to climate change in general, where kind of making these gestures, which are good that it's at least being acknowledged. But as far as the type of response we need to really not stop this, we're way past that point, but at least try to mitigate it some to lessen some of the impact as we go forward. We need dramatic reactions, as in stopping all fossil fuel emissions as abruptly as possible, not setting these long range goals of a certain, getting us back down to a certain percentage of what we used to be in the past. That's I think, rearranging the deck chairs at this point.
Right. So from the conversations that you had with scientists for the piece that you worked on, can you tell us what would happen if we, because we were talking about different methane sources seeping into the atmosphere, but when we talk about the Arctic, when we talk about the permafrost melting, the Arctic methane could be a giant amount of methane released all at once. One of the scientists described it as a large methane burp. What could that do? What sort of impact would that have?
That's right. Both Natalia Shakova and Paul Beckwith, two scientists that I interviewed for the article, warned of this. And basically what that means is there are huge deposits of methane stored in different areas all around the Arctic, and particularly on the eastern Antarctic ice sheet, which is where Shakova has been studying for over a decade. And what that means is we've released to date about 1,475 gigatons of carbon into the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution began in the early to mid 1800s. And they warned that it's very, very possible, literally, that at any moment, a 50 gigaton burp of methane could be released into the atmosphere all at once by certain areas melting or certain areas that have already melted, but it just hasn't been released yet. And that would basically send a shock of gas into the atmosphere of methane specifically that would increase temperatures abruptly. And Beckwith himself warns that we could possibly see, even without that burp, a 5 to 6 degrees C temperature, a global temperature increase within the next 10 to 20 years. And that's basically the same temperature increase that the IPCC warns in their worst case scenario by 2100.
Wow. Finally, Dahr Jamail, you started your Truth Out piece, The Methane Monster Roars, explaining how looking through all of this information that you are collecting and gathering for this story led you into depression. And I have to confess, in reading your piece, it was, as I sort of got inspired into a similar situation and similar state of mind. How do you keep from just not throwing your hands up in the air and walking away and saying, I'll live the rest of my life out on an island till the whole world implodes?
It's hard. I mean, that's really, I think, the question of the day for any of us that are, whether you're a scientist or an activist or a journalist focusing on climate change, because there is no good news. I mean, there is good news on a local level as far as some of the things people are doing, but I think it's really critically important to, first of all, have the feelings, and understand the anguish and the sadness and the anger that goes along with taking in this kind of information, which is something that our culture in general doesn't exactly promote, is people having their feelings. Instead, they prefer to have us distracted or buying things. So that, and then I think getting out into nature on a regular basis to kind of keep spirits up and appreciate, if we're doing all this work to bring this to people's attention, what's the point if we're not going out into nature and appreciating this planet that we live on? So that's another big factor, I think.
And of course, many would say, don't mourn, organize. And there are certainly many avenues for activism on this. I want to thank you so much, Dahr Jamail, for giving us the ammunition for that sort of activism. Thanks so much.
Always a pleasure, Sonali. Thank you.
Dahr Jamail is a staff reporter at Truth Out, and his article in the latest issue of Truth Out, which you can find online, is entitled The Methane Monster Roars. This is Uprising. When we come back, we'll take a look at Tunisia. Today is the 4th anniversary of the fall of President Ben Ali in a revolution that kicked off the Arab Spring movement. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali Kohatkar. One day after the armed attack in Paris against the offices of the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo, 2 Tunisian journalists were reportedly killed in Libya by the Islamic State group of militant Sunni rebels. Sofiane Shourabi and Nadir Qatari had been kidnapped and held captive. According to the Wall Street Journal, a man named Boubacar al-Hakim, a leader of ISIS, took credit for their killings. Hakim hailed from Paris and was part of a network that recruited the Kouachi brothers, who were the suspects in the Charlie Hebdo shooting. The murdered Tunisian journalists had been active in the Jasmine Revolution that began on December 18, 2010, and ended with the fall of longtime Tunisian President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali 4 weeks later, on January 14, 2011. Today is the 4th anniversary of Ben Ali's fall and the start of what was seen as a historic new chapter in Tunisia's history. Tunisia's first democratic elections took place just 2 weeks ago with a runoff election between interim President Monsef Marzouki, the incumbent, and former Ben Ali-aligned leader Beji Caid Essebsi. Essebsi won with a vote of 56%, promising stability, while Marzouki warned against a return of the old guard. Mr. Essebsi is 88 years old and secular and has already recommended the dismantling of the Truth and Dignity Commission, which was set up to account for the crimes of the previous regime. Human rights groups have warned that the revolution, which once seemed so promising, may be unraveling. Joining me live in studio today is Bechir Blagui. He's the founder of freetunisia.org. Welcome to Uprising.
Welcome, Sonali. How are you today?
Thanks so much for joining us. So this was 4 years ago in December that the self-immolation by the street vendor Mohamed Bouazizi sparked the Tunisian Revolution, which in turn is seen to have sparked the Arab Spring movement. Now, one could be optimistic and say that Tunisians have elected a leader just a couple of weeks ago, and it means things are going really well. Are they?
Sonali, really quick, I want to first start by thanking KPFK for the invitation and thanking KPFK for being involved in a lot of what we did before, even during the dictatorship when we were protesting. KPFK was the sole voice with us in the street. Number two, I want to give you a bit of a good news. There is a serious doubt about the death of Sofiane and Hatim.
Oh, these are the
two
two Tunisian journalists.
As a matter of fact, the website that announced it happens to be showing photos from Tunisians dead in Syria, not in Libya. So there is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Tunisia has so far said that there's a bigger chance that they're still alive. So that is a fairly good news for the families, and as we really hope for their comeback. And a third thing, I want to really offer my condolences for the 4 Tunisians that were killed in the Paris attacks, including a young man, a Tunisian of Jewish religion. He was very proud Tunisian, and he speaks to a lot of young Tunisian men and women that are so hopeful for the Tunisian Revolution. So my sincere condolences.
And you bring up a really important point, which is in the press coverage, very few people knew that of the total of 20 dead, a number of people from the Arab world were also victims.
The policeman that we have seen on the street,
Ahmed Meramed
is, some say of Algerian descent or Tunisian,
right.
But in any case, he's a good citizen of France that happens to be of Muslim faith. Again, it's just they touched an array of different people that represent really what France should be. Back to the Tunisian Revolution, it is the 4th anniversary. I was telling Christian earlier that
our production assistant who knows you,
who knows me very well, that basically we went in 4 years. We went through almost what the United States went through in 50, 60, 100 years. So it's really a path of quite a bit of turnarounds, and so far we've had 3 free and fair elections. In 2011, we had the first Constitutional Assembly elected free, and the first time free and fair in the Arab world. And then we wrote a new constitution. The new constitution has very similarities with the United States Constitution and other good constitutions around the world, protecting free speech, freedom of faith. And that has culminated into almost an 89% ratification of the Constitution by the Assembly. Now we had a parliamentarian election in October, and then we had a presidential in November for the first round, and December the second round.
Right, yeah.
So you bring a good point. The gentleman that won, 88-year-old Sipsi, has actually, in fact, he went through pretty much all of modern Tunisia's history, because he was with Tunisia's independence. He was one of the first ministers of Bourguiba's, and then in Ben Ali he was active, and then he was able to redo his image, because when he was given a chance to come in 2011, right after the revolution, he presided over a period that was very tough. We had the Libyan uprising, and we had a number of terrorism attacks. So he got, and then he was able to organize the first election free and fair. So he got a lot of, shall we say, credit for that, and that allowed him to...
He was able to remake his reputation.
And then through the 3 years, we had a void, in the sense that the governance was not there, and he was able to capitalize on that. but the fear is still there.
Right. And why is it that so many former officials from the Ben Ali regime have actually been released? Some of them are back in power. And then there were those who were jailed after the revolution for attacking activists and journalists during the revolution. Human Rights Watch just released a report about how the military trials of those regime officials charged with killing protesters during the 28-day Jasmine Revolution have gotten off very lightly. Why?
In fact, that you bring a good point again, Sonali. In fact, and again, I use this place to make another call for the release of a blogger that I knew fairly well, Yassine Ayari, whose dad was a colonel in the Tunisian army and who was killed by terrorists in Tunisia in 2012, if I'm not mistaken. And he's a son of the army, in the sense that he grew up in the army and he knows very well because of his dad, and he was criticizing some of the issues that the army had, and unfortunately the laws on the book are clear. You criticize the army, you go into army tribunal. We are calling on his release because it is freedom of speech. He has the right to criticize anybody he wants. So he's there. We're pushing for a campaign to release him or to move him to civil court. That is what is needed now. He needs to be moved to civil court. But to your point, there has been an increasing trend of taking civilians to military tribunals. And this is...
And then Ben Ali regime officials being let off the hook.
Absolutely. The parallel of it, even if it's... Again, the problem is these are laws that are already in the book. Right. We have a new constitution, but we don't have the new laws that reflect that new constitution. We still have, he's being judged by a law from 1963.
Wow.
So that is where we are right now. And
so the judiciary and the legislative branches have to catch up with one another.
Catch up, and that is the issue that we have right now.
But you would have thought that there'd be sort of moratorium on enforcing these old laws.
If not even a moratorium that is on the books, a moratorium that is a moral moratorium. Right. And that is what people are calling for. You don't have this, even if you have a law on the book, you don't have to apply it. You could choose based on the circumstances of now, which is the country that is going through still a transition. And then freedom of speech is the number one acquisition that we have from this revolution. That is, economically, we're in dire place.
Something that we're having lots of conversations
about,
but mostly just for the Western world these days. And let's also talk about the Truth and Dignity Commission. This was intended to be similar to South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It was modeled on that. But several top officials who were serving on that have resigned in recent months, saying that it's turned into a political tool. Are you hopeful that that can be salvaged, or is that sort of a...
It has to. It has to. It is, again, this is a constitutional committee. It is on the Constitution. And it has to succeed because we cannot move on without reconciling. And we're seeing already the effects of moving on so quickly without reconciling our past. We have the 300 deaths during the revolution of young men and women. We have over 3,000 injured that are still out there. People need answers. Yeah. People deserve answers.
And I should mention that in the past 4 years during this transition, you've even had some top political opposition leaders who were just literally assassinated.
Amazing
Mohamed Brahmi and Chokri Belaid.
Mohamed Brahmi, who was a member of the Constitutional Assembly, and Chokri Belaid, who is a prominent and amazing orator, as someone that I personally looked up dearly.
Who killed them?
That is... Every Wednesday, as a matter of fact, there is the protest. Since his death, every Wednesday is a protest. Who killed Chokri Belaid? Wow. We believe that it's when it comes to political assassinations, the reasons of and where to find them resides within whoever is in power at that time. And it was the Islamic-leaning party at that point.
And so actually that's an important follow-up. Is what's happening now partly the result of, I mean, we're seeing the tussle between the old guard and the new guard, perhaps both from secular perspectives, and then there's a tension between the secular forces and the fundamentalist forces. In the current parliament, as it stands, the ruling party, Nida Tunis, which is what the president is from, is said Sabzi is from, this party. It's a secular party. They have the majority of seats in parliament, but then the second highest number of seats are by the Ennahda party, which is the Islamic fundamentalist party. So doesn't the ruling party have to come into a coalition with this Islamist party? And if so, are we going to see a dilution of things like freedom of speech?
Well, Sonali, this is interesting in the sense that they don't have an absolute majority, so they do have to coalesce, and they have to find a ruling majority. I mean, they have to form the government, and which are
right. They have a plurality of seats
exactly.
right now, but not a
So they are in the middle of forming a new government right now. The problem with that is this: you have an election that gave clear mandates. And the election gave a clear mandate as to you are not to coalesce with this party. We have tried this party, and this party failed, and we need you now to form, and we don't want you to involve this party. This was the now, and when you base your campaign on we're not gonna involve this second party with us, then now how do you confront your voters? That's been I think. A slippery road that I've seen them now try to walk, and hopefully they'll be able to keep the peace by finding a way out of this. But to have the second party involved and basically leave an opposition that is not substantial as to confront a future government and hold them accountable. That is the question right now.
Right.
That is the question.
I'm wondering if it's too simplistic to compare what's happening in Tunisia to Egypt, given that Egypt's revolution was in many ways inspired by what happened in Tunisia. And we had a situation where in Egypt, a fundamentalist-leaning party, the Muslim Brotherhood, initially came into power, secular forces. Under the cover of secular forces, we've seen the army rise up and take power now and really spearhead a lot of repression.
So some say even worse than before.
Even worse than before. Of course, one big difference is Hosni Mubarak just been acquitted, but in Tunisia, Ben Ali remains in exile.
Yes.
There's a life sentence still against that he supposedly, if he comes back, would be serving a life sentence. Is Tunisia better off than Egypt, and could Egypt provide some important lessons for Tunisia to not go down certain paths?
Regardless of what's happening in Tunisia, I'm glad to say that Tunisia remains the sort of the scenario to follow at this point. If someone can do better, great. But right now,
the most optimistic of scenarios in
the
Tunisia.
sense that and it comes to the nature of the Tunisian people as a culture, as a unit, as a country. We don't have the different, shall we say, we don't have a lot of religious diversity. We don't have. It's a monolithic society that was able to coalesce when times needed, and to agree and form political divergence as opposed to military divergence. And I think that, to me, is what made. We can analyze it as much as we want, but that is the only reason that this is happening right now. Egypt, I mean, I have a lot of activists that I know from Egypt, and some of them are in jail, some of them have been brutalized. I mean, it is really sad, and I feel really bad for what's happening there. But yes, the key is to not take up arms against each other. What is the point of having political parties,
Right.
Sonali, is to not resort to violence.
Right.
And that is what it is. So,
and by the way, what has happened of Ben Ali's lavish palace? And, he raided Tunisia's treasury, fleets of cars. Has there been, what has happened to that? And has there been any reconciliation over that?
As far as what is existing in Tunisia from that, which is a drop in the bucket compared to what's outside of Tunisia. According to another commission, that's a constitutional commission, to recoup and find all those amounts, which are in the billions by all standards, by all accounts. The ones that are in Tunisia, we've seen exposés of the cars and the palaces and whatnot, and slowly they've been selling these off and straight to the Tunisian treasury, and then. The main what they recouped, I believe, was $23 million from a Lebanese bank account, and then but Europe has been lagging, Sonali, lagging in returning the money. And
Europe has been lagging in returning Tunisian money that Ben Ali
I mean, we just had a prime minister
secreted away. What, in Swiss bank accounts? Or?
Well, we've been told that it has to follow the legal procedures and whatnot, but it's been 4 years. We've been, we have a whole ministry dedicated just to this.
Huh.
So I believe that there is a little bit of a up to down kind of look, even though they say they tell you that we are supporting, but okay, well, there's room for you to expedite these things because we need this money.
To support former colonies
exactly,
in their
exactly.
freedom.
So that is an issue.
Yeah.
Switzerland has been telling us that they're going to return it very soon, return the money, a substantial amount of money. France, we just had a prime minister of Tunisia in France, constantly asking, please expedite. So
we started out talking a little bit about the connection with the Charlie Hebdo massacre, and I want to bring up the situation with ISIS in northern Iraq and Syria. The New York Times last October had a piece entitled "New Freedoms in Tunisia Drive Support for ISIS," which is just such a bizarre headline to see. It concluded that, quote, Tunisia has sent more foreign fighters than any other country to Iraq and Syria to join the extremist group that calls itself the Islamic State. How serious is this?
Well, this is a very simplistic, again, way of looking at it. Although we appreciate the New York Times even being present in Tunisia and reporting, I think to us, any attention is good attention. But to clarify this, obviously, we have we have freedom of speech in Tunisia. I mean, we cannot stop you for speaking, whether it's religious but more and more we're clamping down on hatred speech. And I heard your piece earlier about what's happening. But hatred, in a sense, literally calling for people to kill people. And I'm not saying
inciting real direct violence.
Not like when you speak against Israel. That's not hatred speech. That's speech. Yeah. But when you're speaking, telling on people to kill other people, that is not freedom of speech by all standards. Just like shouting, in a
fire in a crowded theater.
Exactly.
Right, yeah.
So that is what. But during the Nahda era, and even by their own accounts, there've been a little bit of laissez-faire attitude, and you would find in mosques, which is obviously it's a place of worship. It's supposed to be. You have to leave politics out. You have to leave hatred out. It's a place for everybody to get closer to God. In mosques, they've been used to do just that, to get young people to doctrinize them and send them to join ISIS. We have over 3,000 Tunisian young men and women in the fights. We have the largest one. Yeah.
Well, finally, let's give out the website, Bechir. Is freetunisia.org a good place for people to get information?
I would say so, and our Facebook page is really active. We got quite a few people asking questions, and we try to answer as much as we can. We have a French version at freetunisia.com as well. And Sonali, I want to definitely thank KPFK again, and my condolences. I mean, it is so heartwarming to see. I mean, what happened in France is bad. But I
want to thank you. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Bechir Blagui is my guest. He's the founder of freetunisia.org, and we'll post that to uprisingwithsonali.com. This is Uprising. Bipasha Shom is our senior producer. Anna Buss is our assistant producer. And Dan Swerdlove is our technical director. Christian Beck is our production assistant. Teddy Robinson and Jonathan Alexander are our audio engineers. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/uprisingwithsonali. Our website is uprisingwithsonali.com. Our theme music is by Quetzal. I'm Sonali Kohatkar, host and executive producer of Uprising. See you tomorrow.